Welcome everyone to this webinar. It's a real pleasure to take part in this, and as Raquel said, we'll be talking about careers, and obviously this is going to be based upon our experiences at Merck, but a lot of things we'll talk about obviously will be applicable to other large pharma companies. So we'll cover things like different functional areas within Merck and Company, the drug discovery process, and then as said, we'll talk a little bit about interviewing and tips and things of this type. So with that, maybe we can go to the next slide. So here's the outline of the discussion today. We'll give a very brief company overview. We'll have some introductions. So Matt, Anthony, and myself will introduce ourselves a bit more in the next few slides first. We'll give a Merck company overview. We'll talk about careers within chemistry, and this is what we call global chemistry. So this is the organization that I belong to. So we'll talk about different types of careers within that organization. Pharmaceutical sciences, Matt will talk to that, and then Anthony will talk about careers in engineering. We'll also talk about non-traditional chemistry careers. So if you're a non-chemistry major, or if you're a chemistry major and are thinking about careers outside of chemistry, then there are those opportunities within Merck, and we'll talk a little bit about what those areas are. And then, as I said, tips on preparing for your career as well, and then followed by Q&A. So with that, maybe next slide. So a little bit about myself. Actually, you might guess from my accent that I grew up in the UK, a little town called West Bromwich, which is very close to a few miles away from Birmingham, which is the second largest city in the UK. I joined Merck in January 1998, so I just passed my 20-year mark. It's just been unbelievable that it's been 20 years. I've been very fortunate to be associated with some great programs. One of these was a CETP, a cholesterol ester transfer protein inhibitor called anacetrapib. If you want to Google that, reached phase 3 clinical trials in the cardiovascular area. In terms of my undergrad and my training and where I did my undergrad and PhD, I did my undergrad at the University of Hertfordshire, which is in suburbs of London, and then a PhD from the University of Nottingham, and then I did a postdoc fellowship at the UT Austin. I think it was Philip in the introductions who was at UT, so go Longhorns. And then some interesting facts about me. I'm a big fan of football. I say an old pun here, the real kind, the English football, and my team, unfortunately, is not doing too well. It is in the English Premier League, but they're at the bottom of the league, unfortunately, this year. And many years ago, I was part of the Merck had a site in the UK, and I was part of the cricket team back then. So that's a little bit about myself. As I said, I'm in the Kenilworth site, senior principal scientist. I think the next slide I'll pass over to Anthony, who's going to just talk about his background and career so far.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anthony Diaz-Santana, and on the top right corner of the slide, you see that I was made in Puerto Rico, where there's nice weather, beautiful beaches, even after the hurricane. I'm hoping that everybody can hear me. I just started talking, and I'm not sure. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you. Okay,
thank you. So I have the least amount of experience at Merck amongst the three of us. I've been with Merck about actually 2.5 years, about that. Before that, I was at L'Oreal for about 3 years, doing photo protection technologies and also a little bit of hair care product development. Before that, I was actually doing my PhD in something completely unrelated to what I do and what I have been doing as of my professional career, which was in vascular engineering, even though my PhD is actually from chemical engineering department at Cornell. Because I am a chemical engineer. That's what I did my undergraduate degree in. And like Raquel said, I am an ACS scholar. I think it was back in 2003 that I was I started being an ACS scholar in 2002. Some random things about me. I have performed microsurgery on tadpoles. I've made 30 gallons of carbonated franc. for anyone that actually enjoys winemaking or any of that. Have a selfie with Julian Moore. My extended family is very large, and you can see that on the bottom right image. That is actually my entire extended family down in Puerto Rico. I'm the only member in that group that you see there to actually pursue any kind of STEM at work and graduate school. I do a little bit of traveling. I do enjoy some salsa dancing, which is kind of like a nice detox from all the real world stuff. And so there, I'll pass it on to Matt.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Lamb. I'm Director of Pre-Formulation at Merck in our New Jersey site, the Rahway, New Jersey site. Education-wise, my undergrad was from Virginia Tech in material science and engineering, something I'm really very proud of as a material scientist. It's not necessarily a very common field, but really love the curriculum and the balance of chemistry and physics and engineering. And that led to a PhD also in material science and engineering at the University of Delaware. From there, I joined Schering-Plough, which eventually merged with Merck. So we consider it to be one company now. At the time, I wasn't really sure what material science meant in the pharmaceutical field. But what I found is that there's so much rich materials problems, so much rich physical chemistry, characterization work, that I fit right in, and I was able to apply the sort of the core experiences that I learned and core skill sets throughout my education to what we do in the pharma field. And it's really satisfying, and it's really intellectually satisfying. There's so many great challenges, not to mention that we're working on medicines that improve human health, treat disease, provide cures for folks. A little bit sort of about what my group does, and I'll go into this later in the presentation, but we do a lot of what we call physical chemistry, physical characterization, spectroscopy and thermal analysis. I have a scanning electron microscope in my lab. I have an atomic force microscope. All this in support of formulation development, which is part of the Pharmaceutical Sciences Organization within Merck. Scientifically, I'm interested in AFM, atomic force microscopy, polymer physics, chemical imaging, and then also sort of non-work related, but something I think a lot about is aviation. I'm a very avid aviation enthusiast. I have my private pilot's license, and try and take as much opportunity as I can to go out and flying. I also enjoy international travel and also making beer. So as we mentioned, what we're presenting today is sort of some insight into different types of chemistry careers in the pharmaceutical field. Certainly at Merck is where we have our most experience, and we're going to try and not make this too much of a commercial for Merck, but as you'll find, we're very passionate about the company. We're proud of the history. We're proud of what we do. And I think that will show in sort of our presentation, obviously through the lens of our experiences at Merck. But certainly the things that we're discussing are certainly applicable to other pharmaceutical companies. And even just, being a scientist in industry, we certainly have perspective there that we can discuss with folks. So just some background, the headquarters of Merck is in Kenilworth, New Jersey. There's about, as of the end of 2016, 68,000 people worldwide. And one of the things we're most proud about is Merck's commitment to R&D research. You can see there, over 10 billion a year is what Merck invests in actually discovering new medicines, doing the clinical trials, developing things. And various companies have different strategies about how they develop medicines, but certainly at Merck, R&D and core R&D is something that we're very proud of and is part of what we do. Sort of some of the areas of focus research-wise, certainly oncology is very important to Merck in the areas of immunotherapy, Merck has commercialized Keytruda, which is our PD-1 inhibitor for all kinds of indications in oncology. Immunotherapy is transforming the way that we're treating cancer now, and it's really exciting to be part of the pharmaceutical industry in this time and place where immunotherapies are now just beginning to gain popularity. So Merck is certainly important there. We also work in areas of infectious disease. I personally have worked on HIV medicines, things that we filed with the FDA and hope to get approved later this year. Also hepatitis C, Merck is very active in, as well as diabetes and acute care, and certainly vaccines. Merck also has a big animal health component of the company, and some of this is for treating cattle and swine, but also companion animals. And so Bravecto, for example, is one of the chewable flea and tick medicines for cats and dogs that Merck has popularized. Just sort of a brief history again. Merck is actually quite an old company. This timeline here contains both sort of sharing plow and Merck history, and like I said, we merged, I think it was in 2009. But you know, Merck has well over 100 years of history in the United States, developing important vaccines, medicines. We'll talk a little bit about ivermectin later in the presentation. A lot of first and a lot of important transitions in the way that certain diseases are treated. So for example, the first statin being approved. Crixivan is for the treatment of HIV, and it was one of the first protease inhibitors that really transformed the antiretroviral therapy treatment of HIV in the mid-90s. As well as we have other vaccines, and as I mentioned, our latest oncology product, Keytruda, is very important. So obviously we're very proud of these developments, and it's all based on fundamental research, development, all through commercialization, which are the three areas that the three of us represent today. And so we're certainly very proud of that. I think this is sort of the last overall Merck slide, but basically different companies are organized in different ways. The way that Merck is organized is these sort of sub-functions. One is global human health. Here is where you probably see some of the non-traditional careers we talked about. Sales and marketing, finance, things like that are all dealt through the global human health. Merck Research Laboratories is where our discovery happens. So a lot of chemistry, biochemists, certainly engineering. I'm part of this organization. Amjad is part of this organization. This is a very large part of Merck's organization. This is the core research that basically gets compounds through discovery, up through clinical trials to where, you know, we basically know whether or not we intend to commercialize this. Merck Manufacturing Division is responsible for commercializing it, and that's basically taking the product that, you know, we've tested now through phase 2 clinical trials and making it ready for commercial launch, basically, and being able to deal with things like packaging and making this at commercial sites on much larger scales than perhaps we did during the earlier clinical trials. And so certainly there's lots of chemistry careers here, both within the US, but also within the global network where a lot of our manufacturing sites are located all throughout the world. Certainly a lot of engineering is also part of this Merck Manufacturing Division. And then, as I mentioned, Merck Animal Health is sort of, I don't want to say its own entity. Some of their labs are actually just up the hallway from mine in Rahway, New Jersey, but they're sort of end-to-end separated from the rest of the human health medicines, where they deal with, again, the Merck Animal Health treatments for both you know, cattle and swine, as well as the companion animals. So from there, we're going to switch back to Amjad, and he's going to tell you about the Merck Chemistry Organization.
Thanks, Matt. So yes, as Matt mentioned, I want to talk a little bit more specifically about chemistry within Merck. Matt talked a little bit about Merck's mission, that is to translate breakthroughs in fundamental biomedical research into meaningful new therapies, vaccines, and really improve human health. And that's the underlying theme of MRL, that is to develop the right therapies to impact human health while creating intellectual property. That's what IP, the acronym IP, is for, and producing great science. So I want to get into a little bit about the drug discovery process. I've split it up into sort of 5 distinct areas. Really begins with identifying a target, whether that be an enzyme or a receptor. We'll talk about how we identify some of those targets in subsequent slides, but once we've identified, say, an enzyme or a receptor we want to inhibit or antagonize or agonize, the next step, the first step in that process, is what we call pre-lead optimization, which is where we try and find a molecule that just serves as a hit for us. You know, it might be weakly active against the target, but we know that it binds to the target. Either it inhibits, or if it's a receptor, you know, we're looking to antagonize. We have some weak activity, but obviously not an optimized molecule. For example, the pharmacokinetic profile might not be ideal. It may not be suitable for once daily dosing. Most medicines that are brought on the market today need to be at least, you know, once daily dosing. You can't really bring molecules forward into the clinic that are twice a day or 3 times a day anymore. So that's initially where that pre-lead optimization step occurs, and then you go into what we call lead optimization. So that's where we look into now improving potency, selectivity against our target, and to really fix the ADME properties. We'll look at the safety profile of the molecule, put it into various preclinical safety tests, in vivo, in vitro, looking at various other off-target hits as well, making sure that the molecule has specific activity, it doesn't have any off-target activities that are unwanted. And once we get to that process, then we declare what's called a PCC, or preclinical candidate. So what this is a single molecule that we deem to have all the sufficient properties to move into now early development. And that's the third phase of this drug discovery process, and that really is where we take a molecule into first healthy volunteers. So we want to look at the pharmacokinetic profile of the molecule, look at some adverse effects, make sure the molecule has properties that are suitable for further advancement, but we're really not in patients at this point. If we make it through that phase, then it does go into patients that are suffering from the disease or ailment that we're trying to treat. That's usually a limited trial. It's a phase 2A trial where we maybe have, 50 or 100 patients that we're looking at. And there we get an understanding of whether the molecule is behaving as we expected based on preclinical data. Are we inhibiting the target? Are we seeing some beneficial effects against the disease indication? And if it makes it through that part, then we'll go into a phase 2B, which is often beyond the proof of concept. So the early studies that I talked about in 50 or 100 patients is really to just get a better understanding that the molecule does work, but we at that point go into a larger phase 2B trial, where now we might go into several hundred patients to look at the efficacy in a bit more detail. We do some dose ranging as well, so we'll look at multiple doses. If that product then looks like it will proceed through there, it'll then go into a phase 3 trial, again, a larger study. Now we're looking into really more detailed patient population and whether we're seeing the beneficial effects that we had seen previously in the phase 2 studies. And eventually, if it makes it through, we will have a product, and then we get into life cycle management, which really won't get into today. But throughout this process, at least those first 4 steps, chemistry is involved really in every bit, every portion of those 4 that I mentioned. And so we have discovery chemistry early on, where we're making molecules to interact with the target. Once we've identified a molecule that we want to go into development, then that's where process chemistry comes in. They will have to make the molecule on kilogram scale. Within medicinal or discovery chemistry, we're really not concerned about yields. We just want to make the molecule to test it, make sure it has the properties. But once you get into humans, you have to make kilos of the material, and that's where really we have to optimize each step, make sure we get maximum yield. And of course, analytical chemistry is involved as well. We want to make sure that the molecule moving forward has a very specific spec and that meets certain purity criteria, which are actually very stringent. So as you can see, chemistry is very important throughout the drug discovery process, and you have chemists working throughout all of those 4 phases that I mentioned. So we can go to the next slide, please, Matt. I just wanted to mention where some of this work occurs. Rahway, New Jersey, that's where Matt is located, and I spent a good part of my early career there. The Kenilworth site is where I'm based now. We have a state-of-the-art facility in Boston, as well as Cambridge, Massachusetts. West Point is another one of our main facilities. We do a lot of vaccine work in West Point, Pennsylvania. And we're having a purpose-built building in San Francisco that will be is actually under construction and will be operational middle of next year. In all of these sites, we have multiple chemistry disciplines that are required, and those are the ones I mentioned previously, and then some of those are listed there again. Next slide, Matt, please. So discovery chemistry at Merck. So the way we engage targets here, and I just wanted to put this up there because to really focus in on just a visual way of looking at the kind of molecules that we work with and we put forward as products here. So this is an example of 5 Merck products starting from, and on the bottom there is just molecular weight. So we have small molecules like Januvia, which is our DPP-4 inhibitor to treat type 2 diabetes. And then as you move through that sort of continuum there, you can see you can go from peptides, as Bridine is our therapeutic for use again in the clinic. And now you're getting up in molecular weight, all the way to proteins. Remicade is a monoclonal antibody, and then Gardasil is our vaccine. So there you're getting into virus-like particle size. So again, chemistry is involved in all of these discoveries, and again, it spans that molecular weight paradigm from very small all the way to virus-like particles. Okay, so I mentioned that part of the drug discovery process involves identifying targets. One way we do that is through chemical biology, where we essentially validate targets. We're looking at how targets are discovered using these various tools that we have. They can involve synthetic and medicinal chemistry, bioinformatics, genome sequencing, and so forth. And really, it's looking at now identifying targets that potentially are druggable. And that's really the key here, to understand whether targets are druggable, and then to understand the MOA, or the mechanism of action. Once you have a good understanding of that, that sort of gets you into the next step, which is now trying to find a lead. And often what we do there is to screen. We have a very big library of compounds that we have that's all automated, that we can screen against to identify initial weak hits. And I think that's on the next slide. And so this is some of the tools that we have: automated robots, state-of-the-art facilities, which allow us to look at high throughput from purification of molecules all the way to optimization of reactions, to now doing screening of microliter solutions to really get these very weak hits that are pivotal to really starting any research program. So the facilities that we have are state-of-the-art, as I said, and a lot of this early target ID work is, as you can see here, is automated and really gets the drug discovery engine really revving very quickly. So we can go to the next slide, please. So Matt mentioned this as well. This is an example of a ivermectin drug, which actually was, as you can see here, William Campbell, a Merck scientist, was jointly awarded the 2015 Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine. This was actually a drug that was discovered initially for animal health. It was used to fight fleas and ticks, but through work that William Campbell and his colleagues did, they discovered that it worked very well for treating river blindness. Now this is a disease, a debilitating disease that affects people that live in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's the black fly that really carries this parasite. And you can see just in the pictures there that black fly carries that parasite, which then really works its way into the eye, and completely makes these people that are affected, that are bitten by this black fly, eventually they become blind. And this is a totally reversible disease if it's treated. And what we found here, what William Campbell and his colleagues found, was this ivermectin drug was very, very effective in treating these patients, and that it could actually cure many patients. Even after a single dose, it was very effective. And so Merck started this partnership where they were donating this drug free of charge. And 29 years later, now you can see that more than 1 billion treatments have been administered in over 117,000 communities in 28 countries, from Africa right through to Latin America and in Yemen. And I think we're on track to really eliminate this disease from the face of the planet. And again, this is a Merck drug that is given essentially free to all these patients. Just a tremendous scientific achievement, but also from this Merck Mectizan donation program, really affects patients and improving lives. So last thing I wanted to mention here was just a very recent drug that was approved. This is a treatment for HCV, hepatitis C, and this is a drug that was denoted ACS Heroes of Chemistry, won that award just last year. It's a combination drug of two different types of inhibitors, NS3 4A inhibitor and an NS5A inhibitor of the hepatitis C virus. Very, very effective, and it was approved in 2016, as you can see, and really is changing the way hepatitis C is being treated, along with other drugs from the same class. But in terms of efficacy, it has a cure rate that's very high compared to other therapies. So again, it's another example of how Merck was able to bring forward cutting-edge medicines that are really affecting patient lives. So I think with that, we can go on to maybe pharmaceutical sciences. Back to Matt.
Yep, thanks, Amjad. So, like I mentioned before, I'm part of the Pharmaceutical Sciences Organization, which is a subset of the Merck Research Laboratories. A little bit of feedback.
I'll take care of it.
All right. So, yep. So pharmaceutical sciences. So this is where we basically take the molecule that comes out of the chemistry organization, the discovery organization, which at that point is really just sort of it's a molecule that has shown some biological activity. It might bind the targets that they think are related to the disease. Maybe they've put it in some small animal studies to see if there's animal models that they have that can, maybe show potential promise, but it's not yet a medicine. And pharmaceutical science is where we take that molecule and we make it a medicine. A medicine meaning this is something that can be given to humans to actually treat the disease. And that oftentimes is not actually as trivial as it may sound. There's lots of molecules that we have that have great biological activity, but they may not have bioavailability. They may not be chemically stable. They may not be able to sit, in your medicine cabinet for more than a week before they degrade. And so all those challenges of basically taking the molecule and making a medicine is what the pharmaceutical sciences department at Merck, and honestly other organizations do as well. So I just sort of mentioned here in the Pharmaceutical Sciences Organization and also Global Clinical Supply, we hire chemical engineers, folks with all different kinds of backgrounds of chemistry, industrial engineering, mentioned myself, material science and engineering, mechanical engineering, as well as folks that actually have degrees in pharmaceutical sciences or pharmacy. And these are just the sites where we currently have our pharmaceutical sciences department and staff located As I mentioned before, I'm in the Rahway, New Jersey site. We have also folks in Kenilworth, West Point, Pennsylvania, Boston, and now South San Francisco in California. And we do have some sites ex-US with varying amounts of pharmaceutical sciences activity that I won't go into for today. So pharmaceutical sciences is a department, and there's lots of sub-functions. Within pharmaceutical sciences, you have analytical sciences. So this is sort of analogous to analytical chemistry. Certainly a lot of chemists are in this department. They work on understanding the chemical stability, not only of the active ingredient, the drug molecule, but also in the formulation itself. And so the other components that are in a formulation that make it a medicine, they oftentimes have a purpose. There's a reason why they're in there. They're functional. And so we do a lot of work to understand what is the chemical and physical interaction between our medicine and all the other things that might be in the formulation. We also have folks that work on device development. This could be injectors for sterile formulations, but Merck also has other implantable devices. We have respiratory inhalers. And so there's a lot of, in this case, mostly mechanical engineering folks that are working on device development. Discovery Pharmaceutical Sciences works closely with the discovery organization to help them evaluate the molecules and ensure that they're being developed with sort of the product in mind. And so Discovery Pharmaceutical Sciences is sort of the link between the discovery chemists who are just sort of focused on the molecule and the pharmaceutical sciences organization who understand we have to be able to make this into a tablet or a capsule or some other formulation. And so they help triage and screen the compounds as they're being developed. We also have different types of formulation groups that focus on, say, oral formulation, things that you take orally, tablets and pills and things like that. Sterile formulations, of course, injectables. And then there's also a biopharmaceutics and specialty dosage group, which biopharmaceutics is a very important aspect of pharmaceutical sciences, but it has to do with understanding how the formulation properties translate into pharmacokinetics. And basically, I'll go into this in the next slide, but imagine taking a pill. That pill has to go into your stomach. It has to dissolve. The pH of your stomach is certainly acidic. It then goes into your intestine, where the pH changes again to something a little bit more basic. The drug has to be absorbed. So all that biological machinery related to the physical chemistry and now how the drug is interacting in the body, just to get into the blood, which ultimately is where it will get to be distributed and then be effective. So understanding all that is not simple. And so there's folks that focus on what we call the biopharmaceutics aspect of it. So we just have a couple select slides here, but as I mentioned, this oral formulation, just having the molecule in your biological assay, having the binding efficiency that you're looking for is not enough. You actually have to make what we call a formulation. And my group, in the pre-formulation group, we actually support a lot of this formulation development. But this is just an example here of what we're seeing is these are the blood plasma concentrations of the drug. So you still take this orally, but then we measure how much medicine is in your blood over time. And you can imagine that when you take a pill and it dissolves, you get this sort of spike in concentration in your blood, and then that slowly decreases over time until you have, the next dose. What we're seeing here are different formulations, an oral suspension, a capsule, a tablet, tablet A, tablet B. There were different formulations of the same active ingredient. And what you notice is on the left here is fasted and on the right is fed. And so if you know that some of your medicines, if it says take with food, that's because the formulation scientists and the biopharmaceutic scientists understood that there's actually an effect that the food has on the ability of the drug to get through your GI system into your blood. So the absorption of the drug may actually be improved with food. Or sometimes your medicine says don't take with food because maybe there's a negative effect that the food would have. Foods tend to have a lot of fat content, and that can affect the way that the drug molecules may be solubilized and absorbed. So what we have to understand when we're making formulations is what might the effect of food be? And honestly, we generally don't want a food effect because we don't want to have something on the label, or we don't want to have our patients potentially, if it says don't take with food, but they forget to take their medicine, they're hungry, they eat their lunch, and then they say, oh, I need to take this medicine, it may not actually have the same efficacy. So we actually design formulations as best we can to mitigate what we call this food effect so that you can get the same bioavailability with and without food. And that's just sort of the complexity of making, again, a molecule into a medicine. Just another highlight from the Pharmaceutical Sciences Department, in addition to tablets, which are, I don't want to say straightforward, but they're one of the more common delivery modalities, we also have other types of what we call specialty dosage forms. And so one of Merck's products is Asthmanex, which is treatment for asthma, and it's inhaled corticosteroid. The formulation for this inhaled device and the design of the device itself is also not trivial. And so we have a lot of work to understand how to make these inhaled devices, and that's actually one of Merck's core expertise is in inhaled formulations. We also have Nasonex, which is a nasal spray, and then we also have meter dose inhalers, which have the propellant in them. And again, so there's a lot of physical chemistry, there's a lot of chemical engineering, materials engineering, mechanical engineering to basically get these medicines into products. As I mentioned, we also have some implants for contraception, NuvaRing, Nexplanon. These are cases where we have the drug loaded into a polymer, and then we control the release over, in the case of Implanon and Nexplanon, years, 3 years or longer. This device is slowly eluting drug. So understanding the physical chemistry that's related to how these devices perform is really important. And that's where all of the pharmaceutical sciences relies on all those aspects of chemistry related to training and degrees that I mentioned before. So from here, I'm going to transfer it to Anthony. He's going to tell us about the engineering organization.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So you've seen a couple of these acronyms / names before. MMD is a Merck manufacturing division. And this is where most of the engineers go to. But like Matt and Amjad have been saying, there's some engineers that actually definitely go to Merck Research Labs and the other divisions. But I'm going to be focusing mostly on MMD with Merck Manufacturing. We do have chemical engineers all across small molecule, biologics, vaccines, and animal health. And so I'm going to actually talk a little bit about science and technology and less on the operations and supply chain. Supply chain, actually, there's more people on the business side and less on the technology engineering side of the world. As you'll notice is across the slide, as you have all the levels of the size of the molecules that Amjad has been mentioning earlier. You have the small molecule that is completely different than biologics. The engineers that work in one don't necessarily work in another, so there's completely siloed, and vaccines as well, and animal health. Let's go to the next slide. So there's the new product commercialization. So this is where Amjad was talking about the life cycle of a molecule, a drug, getting a product out into the world. And so the first time you have the late stage process development. So what these people do, and in fact I'm at that interface. And so what we do is actually we talk to the chemists that develop the process for the API. And this is actually for both new products and processes. So we work with the process chemists that develop the actual synthetic route, and to try to actually understand what are the limitations and how to best scale up the process. So this is the first time that engineers get involved, is when you actually need to start producing more than a handful of kilos, maybe like more than 1 or 2 kilos. So then you require the scaling up. And of course, the scale up, it's not a trivial step of the developing a product. And so we all come together for that. New product commercialization, launching a product also requires the technology transfer to whatever manufacturing site is going to actually be doing this. And this applies to both the small, every size of molecules, if they're small molecules or vaccines, and also applies to whether you are doing the API, which is the active pharmaceutical ingredient, the drug substance, or you're going to do the final product. But because also different people work on those levels of the manufacturing, whether it is the drug product or the final product. And so also the new product commercialization deals with qualification and just general development. If I can go to the next slide. So as I've been saying, the API, active pharmaceutical ingredient, we have all levels of it, the small molecules, biologics, therapeutic vaccines, and you have different examples of actually pretty important drugs that we have been putting out in the market. Our latest Keytruda, Gardasil, and if you could go to the next slide, please. And these are examples of final products, and so we take the API and we then transfer it to the final product site, where they're going to be mixing with all the excipients and other whatever form it's going to be, whether it is injectable, whether it's aerosolized, or there's going to be a tablet. So or a pen. So we make some people make the API and some people will make the actual drug product. And the specialties are actually pretty unique in terms of whether an engineer is in the API world, because the API world deals a lot, well, depending if you're a biologics or a small molecule, you'll be dealing with, if you're in biologics, you'll be dealing with cells. And of course, manufacturing routes requiring cells are very unique, very niche, if you will. And then if you have an API, a small molecule that is synthetic, then you're pretty much dealing with pure organic chemistry at the manufacturing scale. So the skill set is very different. It's very unique. That doesn't mean that you can't transition from one to another, but you'll definitely not be dealing with all of the above during, say, the same year, or the same, if you're going to have two different projects. One is not going to be in product and the other one in API. So if you go to global tech ops, these are, if you have heard the term process engineer, I would say that global tech ops is your typical process engineer. And what does that mean is that we're going to try to ensure that everything goes well with whatever is currently being produced at a commercial scale. So new product commercialization will bring it from all the labs into the manufacturing world, and then global tech ops is going to make sure that it is running as it should be. And so it provides technical support. So if there's any deviations, there's going to be an investigation, and there's going to be corrective actions. Global tech ops will also do startup and qualification of new commercial products. And so that means that before the actual filing filing batches are, after the filing batches are done, then we have to qualify the process, and that actually is its own a standalone event and that is very specific for a manufacturing site. So another option, another key deliverable for global tech ops people is that they actually have they continue to monitor the performance so that you can improve on your manufacturing, so you can make it less costly or more efficient depending on your manufacturing side. So all of this stuff is very manufacturing side dependent, because a lot of the cultures on manufacturing sites impact a lot of how work is actually performed. Not necessarily how the process is done, because the process is already defined by the chemistry, but there is definitely a lot of the site-specific impact on the process. And so global tech operations will definitely be on that, so very specifically on a site and on a process, just making sure that the process runs smoothly and we're delivering consistently based on our targets. And so you have contract manufacturing, internal and external support as well. And then you have your, for those in Chemie, I know there's a handful of them in the audience. Global Engineering Solutions is pretty much what you do on your latest project design course, where you actually get to design a facility and you have to do your capital projects. So you kind of have a plan of construction. How you're going to do the actual plant? How are you going to design where each piece goes? How much pipe do you need? What kind of actual equipment are you going to buy? There's different types of mixers. Which one do you need? And then you're going to also perform the installation and the operational qualification so that you can then release a manufacturing site. This is actual construction from scratch of a manufacturing site. And I should say before I continue on that manufacturing sites that we have, other than what you have already seen on the maps from Matt and Amjad, we do also have a manufacturing site down in Durham, North Carolina. We have a pilot plant, which the pilot plant does not belong to any of these two, and you'll see I'm going to talk about that very briefly. But we have a site in Durham, North Carolina. We also have manufacturing in Singapore. And I should also add Ballydine, Ireland, and Las Piedras in Puerto Rico. Now, let me just very quickly say the Singapore site is the I believe, and you can get, Amjad and Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, but Singapore site I think is the only site that does both API and drug product. And LPO in Puerto Rico specializes in drug product, and Ballydine in Ireland is API. So now we can continue to the next slide. And then you have chemical engineering R&D, which actually belongs to the Merck Research Labs. This is where I work. So I'm at that intersection. A lot of the work actually in Chemi R&D has been changing a little bit more towards the early research to support that initial, scaling up from the early development of small molecule. And but we have these core strengths within Chemi R&D that are very unique. And for those in Chemi, these are textbook problems that Chemi R&D does. So for instance, we have the reaction engineering lab on the top right. You definitely do your reaction kinetics. We do also a lot of stuff that is relatively not explored in a routinely manner for chemical engineers, what's that, workups. We do touch that in very theoretical aspects, but we do actually do a lot of this stuff. And then, for instance, we also have the crystallization lab, which we also, as a chemical engineer, don't really touch much unless you have a specialized course. But you have definitely, crystallizations, precipitations, and we do have a team that does modeling for crystallization, which is also in collaboration with Switzerland. And then the people in the particle engineering lab are actually sometimes they get involved. So on the bottom left, particle engineering and milling. So these guys are designing, with the pharmaceutical scientists, designing kind of how. If they need assistance with like designing how the properties of the actual powders are going to be needed. So, for instance, if an API needs a particular size or needs to be dispersed in a particular way, so the particle engineering lab might be able to assist in that. And a particle engineering lab might also even be involved even way earlier than what typical chemical engineers get involved in, just because, for instance, an aerosolized or an inhaled, drug product requires a very specific particle design. So the particle engineering lab will actually get involved way before the general chemical engineering R&D department does. And then on the top left, we also have process modeling, reaction kinetics, flow chemistry, which is very big right now. Depending on which project we're making, sometimes it makes sense to do flow chemistry, which is really interesting. And then you have in general like high throughput automation, quality by design and regulatory, and this all falls under what we call the intensification lab. And then if you could go back one slide.
Yep, sorry, I'm working on it. I don't know what happened.
Sorry.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, it's fine. So in the bottom, you see that there's two, at the bottom, there's process safety and then there's pilot plant. So process safety, these guys, they're technically called the EPSI lab, engineering process safety. And so what these guys are also very specialized in actually assessing whether how safe it is a reaction to run at scale. So for instance, they're going to study heats of reaction. They actually are able to test whether you can generate, high flammability environments or not, and how to keep it safe, both in the lab and in the pilot plant, which is on the right. And so the pilot plant and process safety, they work hand in hand all the time because they're going to give us measures on how to control and how to safely operate. And then finally, the pilot plant, which I mentioned earlier. The pilot plant actually is a very powerful tool for us in Merck and Rahway. We do drug substances in the pilot plant, and it serves for demonstrating a lot of interesting things that are going to be part of the final process before putting it anywhere near a filing or a manufacturing site. So this is like our first proof of concept of what are the limitations when you're scaling a process. Scaling a process is not trivial, and so we can identify those risks, and then those risks are identified in-house before any of it goes outside. So you have less room for error when you actually put out the process for manufacturing. So I would also say that globally, just overall, there are some partner departments that originated out of chemical engineering R&D that also are in charge of actually submitting the filing and characterizing the process so that a manufacturing site understands exactly how they're going to be executing a process and generates the data to support the filing, the technical report for the filing, meaning, hey, how much does the process tolerate discrepancy in certain parameter of the reaction. Let's say the reaction temperature can only tolerate from -20 to -10, and if you go outside that, then you have a critical parameter. And so that information allows us to understand what is really important in the process to pay attention to during the actual execution of the batches. So all of that general information, it happens within chemical engineering R&D, and there's a handful of chemists that work with us, particularly for the reaction engineering. And I would also say a handful of mechanical engineers with the pilot plant. But most of the people in chemistry, R&D, and engineering world is just chemical engineers. So we can go to the next slide now. And then for just very overview of like non-traditional career paths. So some people, so I'm just gonna say that very generally, and Matt and Amjad can actually comment on this and correct me if I'm wrong, or just add if they think it different. But a lot of these non-traditional career paths, you kind of grow into these. You come in with your technical background, whether there's engineering or chemistry, and you start developing expertise in a particular area of the business, because you do get exposure to different areas of the business while you're doing your job. And there's definitely room for opportunity to actually transition into a different part of the business. And so a couple of these are here listed. You have regulatory quality, which these people are concerned with, documenting what is actually of the process. What are the business processes that there are to ensure that the product is consistent, that the product is the right one. And so how do you document that, and how do you react to differences? And then, of course, you have the environmental people that, they make sure that we don't exceed emissions, that we have a healthy and safe environment. Project management is a key example of one of those a career path where you grow into by experience. When you have higher responsibilities, you have more of a project manager role, and then you can actually transition into project management. I know recently I heard that a chemical engineer in my department had started to transition over to project management as a result of just generally handling different projects as an engineer, and of course their interest into transitioning into that. And then you have others like strategy operations, business development, and patent law, intellectual property. I would say that for the patent law, intellectual property, you'd require at least some additional training, whether that is in actual, you go for your JD or just a certificate in IP. And I think that would be it.
Yeah, so I can cover this. We've put together some thoughts. Just to step back, actually, I hope this was beneficial for most of you. We have just a couple more slides, and I'd certainly be happy to take any questions and have a discussion. But if any of these career paths within the pharma field, or any other, if you're thinking about going into any specific industry, ask yourself, do you have the right degree? Do you have the right training? Are there elective courses you can be taking now that might set you up for experience in some of these other types of industries, pharmaceutics or anything industrial, if that's what you're interested in. Undergraduate research is a great opportunity to expose yourself to certainly academic research, but just to get in the labs, to sort of see what it's like to do day-to-day actual research. This can also really help you prepare for graduate school. So if you intend to go to graduate school, having some undergraduate research experience is certainly a huge plus. Internship and co-op. So Merck and nearly every other big industrial research company offers yearly internships and co-ops. What you want to do is get on those companies' websites, check out when the applications are due, and apply. If you have any networks, folks within the company, maybe you're an ACS mentor, certainly utilize those to help make those connections. These days, it's so easy to apply to a job because of the internet that companies are getting hundreds or thousands of resumes sometimes for positions. So anything you can do to get your resume into the hands of folks that will actually be able to read it is important. And so certainly that leads to the next one, which is building a professional network. As you meet other professional scientists, as you meet your colleagues in school, maintain those professional networks, and that will pay dividends as you become a professional yourself. Whether you're looking to collaborate, change jobs, it's just always important to continue to build and nurture your professional network. Attend conferences is a great way to, again, get exposure to what's happening both in the academic and industrial fields. Of course, the ACS conferences are great. Most of the conferences offer travel awards for students. So that's basically where you can get subsidized funding to go and attend these conferences. Sometimes you may help out by helping out, setting up projectors and things like that. But certainly there's time to go participate. If you can actually present a poster, that would be great. But certainly, you know, take a look at the agenda and see what topics might interest you. Build your network. You know, all great ways to be thinking about how to set yourself up for the next role, whether it's going to graduate school, whether it's looking for a job in industry, or some other career path. And like I said, certainly utilize your mentors. That's what we're here for. Use those connections, maintain those connections, get advice, talk to your advisors, talk to your professors. Many professors actually come from industry, and they can tell you about their experiences. Again, we mentioned sort of the intern program, the Merck Research Labs intern program. These are typically summer interns. Again, check the website for Merck or any company, but they're typically summer interns. They're paid. Different companies have different, you know, if they'll provide housing or there are other types of activities. Sometimes internships can also lead to interviews at the end of the year. You're already there. The folks at the company know, you know, hey, this candidate seems really solid. They're going to be graduating the following year. Let's do an interview so we have, you know, a sense of what their interests are and where they might want to be within the company. So internships, again, at Merck or any other company, highly recommended. It's a great opportunity to get some experience and see day to day, you know, hey, is this something I really want to do? Is this company, is the culture of this company something that I could be a part of? You know, how are the folks, what type of work are they doing? Co-ops tend to be a little bit more extended, oftentimes 4 to 6 months. Sometimes, quite often actually, you get credit, academic credit for co-ops. Those are maybe not as plentiful as internships, but certainly check the career websites of the various companies you might be interested in and see if they're offering co-ops. And here's just some information with respect to the Merck internships. I don't know if we have any graduate students, but Merck also offers a postdoctoral research fellow program. Again, you can see those job posting there. Again, this would be for folks that have earned their PhD and are maybe looking to do postdoctoral research work, maybe not in academia, but in industry. And so Merck offers a postdoctoral research. Again, for applying to positions at Merck, you're going to go to the merck.com career site. For any other company, check out their website, check out their career site. And quite often they have specific links that are for students as opposed to already career professionals. Okay, sorry we ran a little long, but I'm certainly here as long as folks might want to have questions and discuss. And I guess, Raquel, do you want to moderate?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to all three of you, Amjad, Matt, and Anthony, so much for dedicating some of your time in this late evening to chat with us. I really appreciate it. I do want to open up the floor to some questions. So to all of the students on the line, if you want to start sending some questions via the chat, that would be great. There were a couple of questions that came in already online, and some of them were already covered. So I won't reiterate some of those questions that may have already been answered. One of the questions is, what types of things should I look for in the company to ensure a good fit? Whether it's something along the lines of the culture or the type of work that's being done, what should someone look for?
I'm just very quickly going to comment. A curiosity, that intellectual thirst, I think, is the right mindset, and you'll fit right in for the Merck culture.
Yeah, I'd say if you're assessing the company, what are you looking for? Certainly, the culture is a big part. You want to understand, you know, what do they value? Do they value research? Do they value, you know, are they just sort of mergers and acquisitions? And this isn't necessarily specific to pharma. This is more about what is it that you want to do? Are you excited about the business part? If you are really interested in doing, say, fundamental research, not all companies do fundamental research anymore, and that's true in the semiconductor industry and all the way through pharma. So if that's something you're interested in, certainly you want to know, hey, are we doing just sort of applied research? Do we outsource a lot of our research? Folks, certain labs sometimes have, certain companies some have maybe very small laboratory, but they actually work with outside companies to do maybe more of the fundamental research or manufacturing. So, my advice is certainly understand what it is you're looking for yourself in your career, and then try and understand, what the company actually does. Talk to folks that work there, find out what they do day to day. Again, use your professional network. You can try, asking for informational interviews if you have someone from that company, and just talk to them about that. Certainly the culture can be important as well. If the folks work there and they're not happy for a variety of reasons, if they feel like there aren't opportunities to say be creative or to be promoted or whatever, that can sometimes have a negative effect on culture. So best thing to do is talk to folks that work there and try and do your homework.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would add is just the people. If you're passionate about science, I would, when you visit companies or when you're at interviews, talk to the people and see how passionate they are about the science. I can certainly tell you from my experiences, my 20-year experience at Merck, everybody that I work with on a daily basis is absolutely passionate about the work they do. And it's all about trying to discover drugs. It's a difficult business, a lot of failures, but people are really passionate about that.
Awesome, thank you very much. We had another question come in. Could you explain in more detail process chemistry and how is it different from process engineering?
Could you repeat the beginning?
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'll repeat that one more time. Could you explain process chemistry and how is this different from process engineering at Merck?
Thanks. I think Amjad, you wanted to start. I just wanted to repeat the question.
Yeah, so the process chemistry, I can certainly answer that. And I think I touched on it when I was going through my presentation. So, within discovery chemistry or medicinal chemistry, we want to make a molecule, and we're really not interested in optimizing the route to that molecule. We want to just make a few milligrams and test it, right? That's the goal, just make it as quick as we can. And to get the initial read, test it in some either in vitro or in vivo system. But once we've identified a molecule that we're interested in, then obviously a lot of other factors play in. Is it scalable? Can we make kilos of it? Do we have the best processes in place? What kind of yields do we have? Right, within medicinal chemistry, we're not worried. If we have a 20% yield on a particular step, we will carry on because at the end of the day, we just want to make a few milligrams at the end. But when you're making kilos and you're looking at raw materials, then obviously the yield is very important. So we look at yield. We also look at, are each of the steps, are they environmentally friendly? Are you using reagents that are environmentally friendly? Are they sustainable reagents? And so that's what that process chemistry is really looking at all of that, identifying a process to a molecule that's sustainable, cost-effective, high-yielding. Now, the engineering bit, I think, comes in when you've identified a route in the lab that's efficient. How do you then make them recreate it on a kilogram scale that then requires a pilot plant? And probably I'll pass that on to Anthony. He can probably tell you a bit more about that part of it.
Yeah, so the process engineering, and so I'll make a distinction because the chemical engineers in chemical engineering R&D, they really don't do process engineering as in you formerly know in industry, where process engineers are people that are dedicated to a manufacturing site. We are more on the process development side of that world, and like Amjad said, we're trying to scale the production. So we're trying to understand a lot of the limitations, whether if you have a really exothermic reaction, or if your crystallization is a troublesome one, identifying the right way to crystallize the correct form of that crystal. We do a lot of that stuff in the labs and pilot plant with the process development engineers, as well as characterizing what the process parameters are, and what the acceptable ranges for every process parameter. Now, the process engineer, like I said, is in the manufacturing site. They're more on the operations, day-to-day operations, making sure that they have the right supply, that they get everything in place, that they have performed the cleaning of all the process train, that they have the proper process train, that have the proper equipment. So some of those things are similar in the pilot plant, because the pilot plant is a plant after all, but it's a research plant. In the manufacturing plant, it's just everything is in place, and it's more on the repetitive side, versus on process development. And in the pilot plant, which we do process development with, at least we use it like that, it's more experimental. And so you have a lot of different batches that come into the pilot plant for the same molecule that could be, all of them are different. They're made all different, just because we're trying to explore the best way to make them.
Okay, thanks for that. Another question came in. As a freshman, I'm finding it difficult to find internships. What would you suggest to help a freshman gain experience?
Yeah, I can probably start here. It can definitely be tough. I know that at Merck, we have the internship program, and we review resumes. And so, you're a freshman, your resume is not going to have very much on it at that point, and so it might be challenging to be selected. One thing I would recommend is get some undergrad research experience. And certainly, actually, when I was an undergraduate doing undergraduate research, I was actually getting paid for it. I did it in the summer between my junior and senior year, and it was really valuable for me to see what sort of research in a lab was like. And quite honestly, that experience, along with encouragement from my advisor, told me to go to graduate school, which for me was the right career path. So I would start there, and then just as far as trying to get the internship itself, lots of times companies will come to your school for career day. They'll set up interviews. They'll do an information session, and sometimes they set up interviews. So keep an eye out for if there's companies coming and visiting your department, or maybe some of the other departments. Go to the information session. Meet the folks there. Quite often, it's not just HR people. It's at Merck, we actually send our scientists to do the recruiting. And the idea is it's all about building that network, getting them to meet you face to face. When they come back to the company and say, yeah, I was out at this university. I met some great students here. I met this one student. We chatted. Real great energy, great personality. I think we should, I think it'd be great to pass his resume around and see if he or she's a fit for one of our interns. So, the reality is it's competitive, and so you just have to do as much as you can. Again, leverage your network, but also keep an eye out for on-campus career days from the various companies. Be checking the career websites of the companies you might be interested in. Check some of the job boards on your professional societies like ACS, or if there's job boards at your department or your university. But those are some of the, but like I said, again, certainly at Merck, it's always going to be competitive, and you're going to be applying to the same internship as maybe lots of other folks. So the best you can do to improve your resume will certainly help you in the long run. And again, getting that first foot in the door, I would recommend looking at maybe some undergraduate research opportunities to help fill out your resume. And also, maybe your undergraduate research advisor will have some contacts in industry You know, maybe they can write letters of recommendation, but that's really where it all starts, I think.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Another question that came in, are there opportunities at Merck in chemical engineering R&D for those with a 4-year degree, a bachelor's degree?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. It depends on the timing. We definitely have hired as of, I think the last batch of hiring was maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. And yeah, it goes from bachelor's degree all the way up to PhDs. And I would say it's a competitive job to land, because it is kind of a challenging role, and we do find a lot of very competitive applicants, and you know, just like any other company, but there is a handful of roles every now and then. So yep.
Awesome. Another question that came in, how does computational chemistry play a role in Merck, and how do you envision that shifting potentially in the future?
Yeah, I can try and answer that. So it's an important part of the drug discovery process. You know, so when we have identified, say, an enzyme or a receptor, we can, a lot of the times, we can get an X-ray crystal of either a ligand or a drug molecule bound to that receptor, and so we can map out all the amino acids in the active site. And so all that's done by computational chemistry. And so with that knowledge of, say, a bound molecule to the receptor, you can then look at changes in the molecule in a theoretical sense and map out potential either increased or enhanced binding, say, to that binding pocket, or decreased binding. And that obviously will either lead to increased potency, decreased potency, or decreased selectivity. So all those are very interesting, very fascinating. So as a scientist, as a medicinal chemist, you'd have these suite of applications on your desktop. And I've spent many an hour looking at these, you know, and actually you can get 3D versions of these now with 3D screens where you can literally look at these molecules bound. You're almost right at that receptor, and you can visualize it in a 3D way. And it's just fascinating trying to make changes to the molecule and see what effect that would have. So that's an important part of the drug discovery process early on. In terms of the way it's going to change, you know, in the future, currently there's a lot of interest in artificial intelligence and using computational approaches to, shall we say, predict molecules in terms of their binding or their selectivity profile. A lot of what we do still in medicinal chemistry is very iterative. We make molecules, we test them, and then we redesign or change our hypothesis, make that molecule, make a change, and then retest it. But you can imagine where you have now these algorithms where you can look at artificial intelligence, and maybe you can cut that process down to where you're optimizing towards a molecule or a clinical candidate. So just to give you an idea, you know, within the lab, we make 10,000 molecules. We need to make 10,000 molecules to make one drug. So if you can cut that down using computational approaches, artificial intelligence, then obviously that's a great step forward. It's still a very, very challenging area, but it's definitely one where a lot of intense research is going on right now.
Awesome. So that sounds like good opportunities for those that are interested in computational. Alrighty. It looks like our questions have slowed down to a stop, so I think we can call it a night. I want to thank you again for hosting this webinar for us. I really appreciate it. I know the scholars, I hope they have learned a lot from this presentation. Thank you so much. So again, this session has been recorded, and so I will be sharing that with the scholars that weren't able to make it in today. If there aren't any additional questions, then I guess we can go ahead and say goodnight. If any additional questions pop in, just send them via email to scholars@acs.org, and I can send them in bulk to Matt, Amjad, and Anthony. So thanks again, you guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Raquel, for the opportunity, and wish everybody a good evening.
Have a good night, everybody.
All right. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Good night.